Social media, a borderless, flat world where life-changing dreams are ignited with just a few text messages. But behind the smiling emojis and the promises of high salaries in bustling industrial zones, there are sometimes sophisticated traps lying in wait. Today's case takes us back to late 2025 and early 2026, an interprovincial human trafficking ring involving victims under the age of 16. It stretches from the highlands through the industrial hubs and ends in a karaoke bar in the southern delta, a place where girls as young as 13 and 14 were priced like commodities. The victims in our story are Sophie, born 2011, and Lily, born 2012, two young girls from an ethnic minority community in a remote village in the mountains. At an age where they should have been in school, Sophie and Lily carried the burden of escaping poverty. In mid-December 2025, while scrolling through Facebook, they encountered an account named Candy, real name Alice, born 2009. Although Alice was roughly the same age, she cultivated an image online of a sophisticated big sister working in the city with a high income. Preying on the girl's desire to work in industrial factories, Alice dropped the bait. "Come down to the city with me. The work is light, the pay is high, and you don't need a degree." Trusting a friend they had never met, Sophie and Lily packed their bags and left their village, boarding a bus to the industrial province of Bac Ninh, carrying hopes of a prosperous new year for their families. But they didn't know that the moment they stepped on that bus, Alice had already texted a man named Kevin, born 2000. "The goods are on their way." When the two innocent girls arrived at Alice's rental room, the velvet curtain of the industrial dream collapsed. There were no factories, no production lines. Alice coldly informed Kevin, "I found two female employees." Kevin, a cunning operator, immediately recruited an accomplice named Brian, born 2003, to rush from the neighboring province to receive the goods. Here, the true faces of the traffickers were revealed. Kevin and Brian forced Sophie and Lily to work as service staff for karaoke bars, a job that essentially meant entertaining guests, pouring beer, and often much worse. The two girls, terrified, cried and refused, but in a strange place far from home, their tears were futile. A transaction took place right in front of the victim's eyes. Kevin pulled out his wallet and handed Alice 10 million VND, the price for betraying two girls of her own generation. Then, Kevin and Brian forced Sophie and Lily into a car, beginning another dark journey. Kevin and Brian didn't keep Sophie and Lily in the first city. They knew a location that was thirsty for staff in Ninh Binh province. It was the Dubai karaoke bar, managed by a young man named Eric, born 2007. Although Eric was only 18, he showed the hardened nature of the underworld. When Kevin and Brian arrived with the girls, a second negotiation happened swiftly. Eric agreed to buy the two girls from Kevin for 14 million VND. Kevin took the money, paid 1.1 million for the taxi, and tipped his accomplice Brian 300,000 VND. The remainder, over 12 million VND, he pocketed for personal spending. The lives and futures of two children were converted into banknotes, divided coldly like splitting a bill. At Eric's lair, the real nightmare began. Eric forced Sophie and Lily to enter the karaoke rooms to serve customers. But with a survival instinct driven by sheer terror, the two girls fiercely refused. The stubbornness of his merchandise enraged Eric. He realized he couldn't force them to work immediately. Instead of releasing them, on January 14, 2026, Eric hatched a more audacious plan: extortion. He used a phone to call Mr. Arthur, Sophie's father, back in the mountains. His voice was ice cold as he threatened and demanded Mr. Arthur transfer 17 million VND to secure his daughter's release. Eric viewed this as a ransom to recoup the money he had paid Kevin. The act of extortion was Eric's fatal mistake. Upon receiving the report from the victim's family and determining the serious nature of a case involving minors, the Provincial Criminal Investigation Agency immediately launched an operation. Coordinating closely with local units, detectives quickly pinpointed the location at the karaoke bar. A rescue plan was meticulously drawn up to ensure the absolute safety of the two child hostages. In a surprise raid under the cover of night, authorities stormed the premises, subdued Eric, and successfully rescued Sophie and Lily. Simultaneously, other scout units tracked down and arrested Kevin and Brian. At the police station, faced with inadmissible evidence, Eric, Kevin, and Brian had to bow their heads and confess. Eric was charged with appropriation of property, extortion. Kevin and Brian were charged with trafficking of persons under 16. As for Alice, the initial recruiter, authorities are coordinating across provinces to ensure she faces the full weight of the law. Sophie and Lily have been safely returned to their families. Their physical and mental health is stabilizing. But the psychological scars of those days, being treated like goods passed from hand to hand, will likely haunt them for a long time. The case closes, but it leaves behind a piercing alarm. It is a costly lesson for those blinded by greed who trample on morality and the law. At the same time, it is an urgent reminder to parents in remote areas: be wary of easy job, high pay offers on social media, because behind the phone screen, a trap may be waiting to swallow your child's future.
Vietnam is known for its peace and safety, but like any society, it still has its darker side and stories worth reflecting on. Everything you hear here is based on the truth, nothing but the truth. For the sake of international viewers, the full names of both perpetrators and victims have been altered, but the essence of the story remains unchanged.
On the afternoon of July 11, 2018, residents of Thong Nut Ward in Pleiku City were met with a haunting scene that would shake them to their core. A young woman, emaciated and caked in mud, dragged herself out of a roadside drainage pipe. But far more terrifying than the filth was the condition of her body. Covered in crisscrossing burns, her teeth broken, an ear sliced open, and her skin riddled with infected wounds. This was Yi Nhu, 23 years old. She had just escaped a literal living hell, a place where her employer, in a meth-induced psychosis, had subjected her to 13 of the most sadistic torture methods imaginable. The case of Nguyen Thi Ha, also known as Na Vot, is not merely a case of intentional injury. It is a story about the devastation of drugs and the complete erasure of humanity. What happened behind those closed doors? The story begins in 2014. Yi Nhu, a young woman from the Ji Trang ethnic minority in Kon Tum province, decided to leave her village. Driven by her family's extreme poverty, she moved to Ja Lai to work, hoping to change her life. Initially working as a wedding server, she was later hired by Nguyen Thi Ha, born 1979, nicknamed Na Vot, as a live-in maid. Her duties were simple: cleaning and cooking, for a salary of 3.5 million VND a month. It wasn't a fortune, but enough for Yi Nhu to dream of helping her family. The first few years passed quietly, but tragedy began to simmer when the White Death crept into the house. Nguyen Thi Ha fell into addiction using crystal meth. Not content with using alone, Ha dragged her other employees into the drug habit as well. As the drugs took control of her brain, Na Vot began to hallucinate. She became convinced that Yi Nhu, the gentlest person in the house, had stolen her money. Without evidence or reason, starting in early June 2018, the gates of hell officially opened for Yi Nhu. For over a month, from June until July 9, 2018, Yi Nhu endured a total of 13 horrific torture sessions. Imagine a human body having to withstand this. It started with beatings using a 90-centimeter sword and a hollow iron bar striking her head, shoulders, and hands. The pain was so unbearable that Inu falsely confessed to stealing the money, just hoping for mercy. She led Ha to the garden to dig for the imaginary cash, but naturally there was no money, and Ha's madness only intensified. The cruelty escalated day by day. Ha used a wooden plank with 5 long nails driven into it, striking Inu directly in the stomach, piercing the skin. She used a mini gas torch to burn the young girl's hair and scalp. Not yet satisfied, Ha ordered others to heat an iron bar over a charcoal stove, then press the glowing metal directly against Inu's face, neck, back, and thighs. Can you imagine the smell of burning flesh and the screams of despair in that house? But the savagery reached its peak in the days that followed. Ha forced Inu to place her hand on a cutting board and smashed her thumb with an iron hammer. She used the hammer to break the victim's front teeth, and most horrifying of all, Ha used a pair of iron pliers to coldly twist and pull out Inu's teeth one by one while she was fully conscious. Then she used the pliers to clip and tear the girl's left ear. On the final day before the escape, Ha plugged in 2 electric irons until they were scorching hot, then pressed them directly on Inu's chest, stomach, and buttocks. By this point, the 23-year-old's body didn't have a single inch of unscarred skin. Her injury rate was later determined to be 72%, a number that speaks to the brutal destruction she suffered. Overnight on July 10th, heading into the 11th, Inu used the last of her strength to escape while Ha and her henchmen were distracted. She crawled into a drainage pipe under a construction on Lê Đại Han Street and hid there all night, ignoring the mud and the agony of her wounds, terrified of being caught. By 1 p.m. the next day, locals found her. The truth came to light. Police stepped in, and Nguyen Thi Ha was arrested. However, there was another pain Inu reported that the law could not prosecute. She stated she was pregnant during her captivity, but after ruthless kicks to her stomach by Ha and her acolytes, she miscarried. The fetus was buried in a hurry. Investigators took Inu to find the burial site for DNA testing, but nothing was found. Ha denied it, and with no other witnesses, this act could not be prosecuted. It remains a silent, unresolved tragedy. On November 2nd, 2018, the People's Court of Pleiku City opened the trial. Before the court, Nguyen Thi Ha, the woman who used pliers, hammers, irons, and swords to torture a human being, appeared remorseful. Her family paid 180 million VND in compensation. Surprisingly, Inu, despite bearing 72% permanent disability, filed a request for leniency for her torturer, a heartbreaking display of forgiveness from this honest young woman. The court sentenced Nguyen Thi Ha to 10 years in prison for intentional infliction of injury. 10 years for a monster, 180 million VND in compensation. Are these numbers enough to trade for Inu's health, her beauty, and the 72% of her body that was destroyed? Can it erase her nightmares of hot irons and pliers? The case is closed, but it leaves a stark warning about how drugs destroy human character. From a normal woman, meth turned Ha into a demon. And poor, uneducated workers like Inu are always the most vulnerable victims. What do you think about this 10-year sentence? Is it enough of a deterrent for such cruel behavior? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to follow other shocking cases.
Today, we're digging into a court case out of Vietnam that honestly just stunned the entire country. It's a story about an employer, her domestic worker, and, well, a level of cruelty that leads to a verdict you might not expect.
So 10 years. That was the final sentence handed down to the defendant, Nguyen Thi Ha, a decade behind bars. But to really get how the court landed on that specific number, we've got to rewind and look at the whole story.
Okay, so the official charge, it translates to intentional injury. But let me tell you, as the court soon found out, that legal term, it doesn't even come close to describing the calculated, sadistic violence that one woman inflicted on another. To really understand this verdict, we're going to walk through the entire story. We'll start with the victim's background, then get into the month of horrific abuse she went through, her incredible escape, how the court actually weighed all the evidence, and then, this is the really wild part, a surprising plea that was made right at the very end. All right, let's start with the young woman at the absolute heart of this case. Who was she and how did she end up in this situation?
So, the victim's name was Yan Yu. She was just 23 from the Jie Triang ethnic minority. And like so many others from rural areas, she left home because of tough family circumstances. She was looking for work in the city of Pleiku, and she got a job with Nguyen Thi Ha as a housekeeper. The pay, about $150 a month.
And this is where everything just takes a horrifying turn. The employer, Ha, after using methamphetamine, got incredibly paranoid. She accused Wani Yu of stealing from her. And that single accusation, it was the spark that ignited a month of just unimaginable cruelty.
And what came next? This wasn't just a single burst of anger. No, this was a relentless, systematic campaign of violence. The court actually documented at least 13 separate, distinct instances of torture, all packed into a single month.
It started in early June. Ha grabbed a 90-centimeter sword and just struck Yan Yatinyu on her shoulder and the back of her hand.
From there, the torture just escalated, fast. Ha would heat up iron rods in a charcoal fire and then press them right against Yi Nio's face, her neck, her back, her arms, her legs, causing these horrific burns.
And at one point, Ha used what you can only describe as a specially prepared weapon, a wooden plank that she'd driven 5 nails through. And she used this to repeatedly strike Yan Yu in the abdomen.
The cruelty just kept going. She used a mini gas torch, the kind you might see in a kitchen, and she used it to burn Wai Niu's hair and scalp.
Her hands were very deliberately targeted. Ha forced Yi Niu to put her hands on a cutting board, and then she just smashed her fingers and knuckles with a hammer.
And then she took that same hammer and turned it on Yi Ni's mouth, breaking her front teeth. After that, she grabbed a pair of pliers and just forcibly pulled 2 of them out. And you have to understand, these attacks were just relentlessly repetitive. On one occasion, Ha took 2 hot clothes irons and just pressed them against Yuan Yu's chest, her abdomen, and her back over and over and over again.
After more than a month of this escalating nightmare, Yi Niu saw a chance, a small window of opportunity, and she knew this might be her only shot at getting out.
So, in the dead of night, while her captors were distracted, Yin Yu managed to flee the house. She ran to a construction site nearby and hid herself inside a concrete drainage pipe. She stayed there all night and through the next morning. It wasn't until the afternoon that some local residents found her and immediately took her to the police. Her physical ordeal, at least, was finally over. So, okay, once this horrific case gets into the justice system, how does a court even begin to process this level of cruelty? How do you translate these acts into a legal judgment?
The first step was a forensic examination. They needed to figure out the exact extent of the physical damage to Yan Yu's body, and the result came back as a single number, 72%.
And that number is incredibly important. In the Vietnamese legal system, this percentage of bodily harm is a critical piece of medical evidence. It's not just a guess. It's a formal assessment that quantifies the permanent damage done to a person's body. So that 72% figure, it became the stark, official record of everything Wai Niu had suffered. From there, the court had to do this really difficult balancing act. On one side, you have these incredibly serious, aggravating factors, the thuggish, brutal nature of the crime, the fact that it wasn't just one attack, but multiple, repeated offenses, and of course, the use of cruel and torturous methods. But then, on the other side of the scale, you have mitigating factors. Ha did give an honest confession. Her family paid a significant amount in compensation, 180 million dong. Her father was a decorated war veteran. And then, the most surprising one of all, Yi Nio herself actually pleaded for a lighter sentence. So, after weighing all of this, the forensic reports, the testimony, all those legal factors, the court was ready to deliver its final judgment.
The final verdict for Nguyen Thi Ha was 10 years in prison. But as the trial was wrapping up, the single most unforgettable moment, it didn't come from the judge. It came from the victim. Think about this. Despite every single act of torture, every burn, every broken bone she had to endure, Yi Niu stood up in that courtroom. She looked at the woman who had done all this to her, and she asked the judge for mercy.
And that just leaves us with this incredibly profound question, right? Yanyu's plea, it forces us to look beyond the legal math of aggravating and mitigating factors. It makes us ask ourselves about the unbelievable complexities of the human spirit when faced with extreme violence.
In the quiet archives of the Quang Trung Ward People's Committee, the file on Nguyen Thi Thu was closed. It had been closed for 5 years. According to official records, Chikluk Khaiter So 80/TLK-BS, Thu had died of a sudden stroke on June 8, 2020. Her family had mourned her, a grave had been dug, and the community had moved on. But on the morning of December 17, 2025, the impossible happened. A woman walked into the Quang Trung police station. She looked weary, perhaps a bit older than the photo in the file, but the resemblance was undeniable. She sat down before the officers and made a request that defied the laws of nature. She wanted to cancel her own death certificate. The woman was Nguyen Thi Thu. She was alive, breathing, and standing at the center of one of the most audacious insurance fraud schemes the province had ever seen. To understand the resurrection, one must rewind to 2017. Following a divorce, Thu, born 1984, moved back in with her mother, Madame Tran Thi Top, in Biem Sun Town. Life was hard. Thu worked itinerant jobs in the southern provinces, but by 2020, her world was darkening. She was diagnosed with cancer, her relationship with her mother was fracturing under the weight of constant arguments, and she was financially desperate. It was during this period of despair that Thu hatched a macabre plan. Between her travels, she had purchased 4 life insurance policies from Prudential and Fu Hung Life. She realized she was worth dead than alive. She needed an accomplice. She turned to the only person she could trust, her mother. According to police dossiers, Madame Top initially recoiled at the idea, but Thu played her final card, a psychological ultimatum. "She threatened me," Madame Top later confessed to investigators. "She said if I didn't help her fake her death, she would bite through an electrical cord and kill herself for real. Then I would lose my child and the money." Cornered by fear and greed, the mother agreed. The script was written. The date was set for June 7, 2020. The execution of the plan was theatrical, relying on the sanctity of death to shield them from scrutiny. Thu swallowed a dose of sleeping pills, enough to sedate her but not kill her. Then she staged a fall in the bathroom, deliberately injuring her face to cause bleeding, adding a visceral reality to the accident. She collapsed on her bed, feigning death. Panic was manufactured. Neighbors and local authorities were notified of a sudden death. Behind the scenes, the mother and daughter had enlisted a third party, a local shaman from Huatjiang commune, who has since passed away in 2022, to help orchestrate the spiritual and logistical cover-up. As the village prepared for a tragedy, the corpse was waiting for darkness. Around midnight, while the house was quiet or perhaps distracted by the orchestrated chaos, Thu rose from the dead. She slipped out of the house under the cover of night, hiding first at the shaman's residence before fleeing south to Dong Nai province. Back in Thang Hoa, a funeral was held. Tears were shed over an empty coffin, or perhaps a weighted one, and a fake grave was established. The community paid their respects, unaware they were actors in $1 million play. With Thu living as a ghost in the south, Madame Top played the grieving mother. On June 8, 2020, she obtained the official death certificate. Armed with this government-stamped proof, she approached the insurance companies. The ruse worked perfectly. Investigators later found the liquidation papers in Madame Top's home.
Prudential paid out over 682 million VND. Fu Hung Life paid 600 million. In total, the mother and daughter had defrauded the system of over 1.2 billion VND, approximately 50,000 USD, a fortune in rural Vietnam. For 5 years, the secret held. Thu lived under the radar, a person without a name, while her mother lived with the proceeds of the crime. However, the perfect crime failed at the finish line. Whether driven by guilt, a need to reclaim her legal identity for administrative reasons, or simply the arrogance that time had washed away the crime, Thu returned to Thanh Hoa in late 2025. Her request to delete her death registration alerted the Quang Trung police. The police were not easily swayed by ghosts. Recognizing the anomalies, specifically that a dead woman was sitting in their lobby, they transferred the case to Thanh Hoa Provincial Police. The investigation was swift. Confronted by the sheer impossibility of her existence, Thu and her mother confessed. The investigation concluded that the fraud was sophisticated, exploiting the keha, or loopholes in local administrative procedures, and the cultural taboo of questioning a family in mourning. The subjects were willing to use every trick, including spiritual elements and the trust of the local government, to hide their crime, a police spokesperson noted. Today, instead of enjoying a windfall, Thu and Madame Top face criminal charges under Article 213 of the Penal Code for insurance fraud. Because the amount exceeds 1 billion VND and involved organized deceit, they face a potential sentence of 3 to 7 years in prison. The fake grave of Nguyen Thi Thu remains in Thanh Hoa, a hollow monument to a daughter who sold her life for money and a mother who helped her bury the truth.
All right, let's get into this. We're talking about an absolutely wild story of a woman who, for all intents and purposes, came back from the dead. But this wasn't some miracle, nope. It was an incredibly detailed plan to fake her own death, all for a giant insurance payday.
I mean, seriously, what would you do? It sounds like something straight out of a movie script, right? But for a few government officials in Vietnam, this wasn't fiction. This bizarre, impossible question became their reality, and it kicked off an investigation into a crime that had stayed buried for 5 whole years.
So picture this. It's just a normal day at a government office in Thanh Hoa province. People are filing paperwork, phones are ringing, and then everything grinds to a halt. A woman walks in, a woman whose official records say she died back in 2020. She is very clearly alive, and what she's about to ask is going to blow their mind.
Okay, so let's start right there. At the exact moment this whole complicated lie just started to completely fall apart. This is the story of how a ghost decided to walk out of the shadows and right back into the system she had tricked.
You can just feel the confusion in that room. This woman, Wendy Tu, walks up to the counter and asks for something that sounds impossible. "Hi, can you please cancel my death certificate?" This isn't like fixing a typo on a driver's license. She's telling them her entire death, the funeral, the mourning, all of it was one big lie. And this really lays out the completely bizarre situation they were in. On one hand, you have an official, legally binding document, a death certificate from 5 years ago. On the other hand, you have the woman it's about, standing right there, very much alive. For the police, this wasn't just some clerical error. It was an immediate, flashing red flag that a serious crime had been committed.
So, a dead woman showing up immediately begs the question, why? I mean, why would anyone go through all the trouble, the incredible risk to fake their own death? To figure that out, we have to rewind the clock back to 2020.
So Nguyen Thi Thu's life was, well, it was a mess. She was divorced, she was living with her mom, and they were fighting constantly. And then on top of all that, she gets diagnosed with cancer. She was completely desperate. But amid all that chaos, she had one thing: 4 separate life insurance policies. And that's when this dark, crazy idea started to form. And this quote from her mother, wow, it just tells you everything you need to know about the pressure she was under. At first, her mom, Chun Thi Tap, said no way. But Thu's desperation turned ugly. She basically blackmailed her, threatening to kill herself for real if her mom didn't go along with the plan. Faced with losing her daughter either way, she felt trapped. She had to agree.
So now, with her mother on board, this wasn't just a desperate thought anymore. It became a full-blown conspiracy. The next challenge? staging a death so real, so convincing, it would fool everyone, their family, their friends, and all the authorities.
The plan they came up with was like a performance in 4 acts. First, the accident. Thu took sleeping pills and pretended to have a fatal fall. Then, to make it look legit, they hired a shaman to perform secret burial rites. After that came the public funeral, where their own heartbroken family mourned a woman who was actually still alive. And finally, with everyone believing she was gone, Thu just disappeared. She woke up and quietly left town.
And here's the key to how they pulled it off for so long. Only 3 people were in on it. That's it. By keeping the circle of trust that small, they managed to fool an entire community. They let their own family grieve a death that never even happened.
So, the funeral was a success. The next phase of the plan could begin. Get the money and vanish. For the next 5 years, as far as the world was concerned, Nguyen Thi Tve was a ghost.
So here's how it all played out. The setup starts way back in 2017, when she buys the policies. Then in 2020, she dies, and her mom cashes in on the insurance almost immediately. For the next 4 years, Thu is hundreds of kilometers away, living a secret life. The plan worked perfectly, until the day she decided to walk back into that government office.
And what was it all for? This. Over 1.2 billion Vietnamese dong. That is a life-changing amount of money paid out by 2 different insurance companies. That was the prize. And for 5 years, it really looked like they had gotten away with a perfect crime. But you know, a lie this huge, it can't stay hidden forever. The moment Thu reappeared, the consequences, both legal and social, started coming for them, and fast.
So under Vietnamese law, what they did has a name: fraud in insurance business. And it's a really big deal, because the amount of money was so large and the plan was so detailed, both Thu and her mother are looking at some serious time, somewhere between 3 and 7 years in prison.
But the fallout goes so much further than just prison time. Think about it. This was a massive betrayal of their family, their friends, everyone who mourned for her. It also stomped all over a really important cultural value in Vietnam about honoring the dead. And on a bigger level, this whole case blew the lid off some serious weaknesses in how deaths are verified and how insurance companies pay out claims.
You know, in the end, this story is just an incredible reminder. A lie that was smart enough to fool everyone for 5 long years still completely collapsed. It just leaves you with this one fascinating question. What could be so awful about being a ghost, about officially not existing, that would make someone choose to confess, knowing full well it meant they were going to prison?
In a courtroom that has captured the attention of the entire nation, the People's Court of Tai Binh Province opened the first instance trial against the infamous husband and wife duo Nguyen Xuan Yu, known as Duong Nu, and Nguyen Thi Duong, along with 5 accomplices. The group stands accused of running a mafia-style protection racket that preyed on the bereaved, charged under Article 170 of the 2015 Penal Code for appropriation of property. For nearly 3 years, the funeral industry in Tai Binh Province operated under a dark shadow. According to the indictment, number 44/CT/VKSTB, between late 2017 and April 2020, Duong Nu orchestrated a sophisticated extortion scheme targeting 25 funeral service owners. The prosecution alleges that Duong utilized the facade of the Duong Duong Limited Liability Company, where his wife served as director, to strong-arm local businesses. Despite the company having no legal function in cremation services, no infrastructure, and no authorization from the Hoyong Long Funeral Service Joint Stock Company, Namdin, Duong declared himself the chairman of the Tai Binh Funeral Association. In a move reminiscent of organized crime syndicates, Duong unilaterally issued regulations and forced funeral homes to sign principal contracts. The terms were non-negotiable. Businesses had to report their activities and pay a tribute of 500,000 VND, or approximately $20, for every cremation case. The indictment reveals that through threats, intimidation, and the abuse of his company's shadow, the gang successfully extorted a total of 2.469 billion VND from the victims. The analysis of the gang's operation reveals a brutal enforcement mechanism. The 5 accomplices, identified as Ning Duc Loy, Pham Van Uy, alias Troon, Nguyen Kok Nin, Bui Mon Tin, known as Tien White, Duong's adopted son, and Quoc Viet Cuong, acted as the muscle and administrative arms of the operation. If a funeral service provider refused to pay the fee or attempted to bypass Duong's association, the consequences were swift and violent. The group would intercept hearses, physically assault drivers, and ban the non-compliant businesses from operating in specific territories. It was, in essence, a monopoly maintained by violence. The atmosphere at the trial reflected the lingering fear the Duong faction instilled in the community. Of the 25 identified victims, only 4 dared to appear in court. Similarly, only 1 of the 11 witnesses was present, with the majority submitting applications to be tried in absentia. This trial is merely the latest chapter in the criminal saga of the Duong family. It was noted in court that 4 of the 7 defendants are already serving prison sentences for previous convictions, painting a picture of habitual criminality. Nguyen Xuan Yu, currently serving a combined 7-year sentence for intentional injury and invasion of residence. Bui Mon Tin, the adopted son, serving 12 years for similar violent offenses. Nguyen Thi Duong, serving 4 years and 6 months for intentional injury and abuse of position and power while performing official duties. Pham Van Uy, serving a heavy sentence of 22 years for murder and intentional injury. The trial continues as the public watches closely, hoping for a verdict that finally closes the chapter on a gang that sought to profit from the grief of others.
All right, today we're diving into a true crime story out of Vietnam that is just unbelievable. It's about a criminal gang that figured out how to muscle in on one of the most sacred moments in anyone's life, the final farewell.
I mean, this is a story about a gang that literally found a way to profit from death itself. And they did it by extorting the very people who handle funeral services, basically creating a monopoly on mourning. So let's actually start this story at the very end, with the dramatic, high-stakes trial that finally dragged this entire criminal enterprise out into the light. So here are our defendants. You've got a group of 7 people in the dock, and right at the heart of it is the husband and wife team, Nguyen Xuan Dung and Nguyen Thi Dung, along with their adopted son and 4 of their cronies. And they were all facing the exact same charge. That charge? Extortion of property. Now, under Vietnam's legal code, that basically means using threats, intimidation, and violence to systematically force people to hand over their money. Plain and simple.
So, to really understand how this whole thing was even possible, we need to zoom in on the man at the center of this whole web, Nguyen Xuan Dung, who was better known by his nickname, Dung Nhoi.
And here's where it gets kind of wild. Dung didn't just use brute force. He tried to give his whole scam a fake sense of legitimacy. He actually went around calling himself the president of the Taiping Funeral Association, an organization that, you guessed it, didn't even exist. He just made it up. I mean, it was a complete house of cards. The association was fake. His wife's company, which he used as a front, had absolutely no authority to do any of this, and he had 0 official contracts with anyone. The entire empire was built on a foundation of pure lies. So you have to be asking, right? How did this guy and his gang actually manage to take over an entire industry in a whole province? How on earth do you create a monopoly on something as personal as a funeral?
Well, the way they did it was as brutal as it was simple. It really just boiled down to a 3-step playbook for total control.
It was a pretty simple and ruthless system. First, you invent the fake association and make up your own rules. Second, you force everyone to pay a mandatory fee. And third, if anyone dared to refuse, well, that's when the gang would show up, block their vehicles, threaten them, and get violent. This forced 25 different funeral providers to pay an illegal tax on every single death they handled.
And this was the price of admission.
For every single cremation, funeral homes had to pay his gang a fee of 500,000 Vietnamese dong. Now that's about 20 US dollars. It might not sound like a huge amount, but it was mandatory every single time.
And believe me, those small fees added up fast. Over just 3 years, they managed to extort almost 2.5 billion dong. That's over 100,000 US dollars. This was a seriously profitable criminal enterprise, built one shakedown at a time. But here's the thing. To really get why this worked, why everyone was so afraid, you have to realize this wasn't their first rodeo. These weren't just some guys trying to make a quick buck. They were seasoned, violent criminals.
Just take a look at their rap sheets. It is absolutely chilling. At the time of this trial, a lot of them were already in prison for other stuff. We're talking murder, assault, trespassing, you name it. This history of violence is exactly why their threats worked. Everybody knew they weren't bluffing.
So all of that brings us right back to the courtroom and the final day of reckoning for the victims who have been living in fear for years.
But even with the entire gang locked up, the fear was still there. And this right here tells you everything. Out of 25 victims, only 4 were brave enough to actually show up in court. 21 of them were so intimidated that they stayed away. That just speaks volumes about the terror this gang created. And while the victims were scared, the public was watching. The court report itself said people were riveted, because this case, it wasn't just about money. It was about a community trying to reclaim its dignity from a gang that had taken advantage of their most sacred moments.
Ultimately, that trial really was the end of an era. It was the downfall of Dong Ngu's reign of terror. It was the moment justice finally caught up with the funeral kingpin and his entire operation.
So what do we take away from a case like this? Well, it's a really stark reminder of how organized crime can worm its way into the most personal parts of our lives. You can count the money they stole, sure, but when a community can't even mourn its dead in peace, well, the true cost is something much deeper and way harder to measure.
All right, today we're diving into the final chapter of a case that's had everyone talking. The story of Winston During. You probably know him as Dern Yui. It's a wild tale of organized crime, extortion, and, after a very long legal fight, the book on this one is officially closed.
And when all is said and done, the whole story boils down to this one number, 15. That's 15 years behind bars for the mastermind, Nguyen Xuan Dorn. So how did we finally get to this point? Let's break it all down.
Okay, so first up, the final verdict. You see, after the first trial, the case was appealed. This is where the Court of Appeals gets the final say, and boy did they.
On May 24th, the High People's Court in Hanoi came back with its decision, and it was a firm no. They completely rejected the appeals. So just to be clear, this wasn't a do-over. The court just looked at everything and said, yep, the first verdict was the right one. Those sentences are now final. No turning back.
And yeah, those original sentences, they stuck. The ringleader, Deng Ye, is looking at 15 years for extortion. His right-hand man, Nguyen Kok Nin, gets 12 years. They rolled the dice with an appeal, and the court just wasn't buying it.
So what on earth did these guys do to get so much time? Well, this wasn't just some run-of-the-mill threat. We're talking about a super organized extortion racket that preyed on people during one of the worst moments of their lives, planning a funeral.
And just so we're all on the same page, the official charge here was extortion. You know, at its core, it's pretty simple. It's using threats and intimidation to force somebody to give you their money. But what's really wild is the sheer scale of this operation. They weren't just shaking down 1 or 2 competitors. No. During's crew went after all 25 funeral service providers in the entire province of Tai Binh. They were trying to build a monopoly based entirely on fear.
And how they did it was pretty slick in a criminal sort of way. It was basically a 3-step playbook. First, they create this phony funeral association and slap Deng's name on it as president to look legit. Then, they strong-arm every funeral service in the area into joining. And finally, the cash grab. A mandatory fee of 500,000 VND for every single cremation.
And you know what? Those little fees added up big time. Before they were shut down, the group had extorted nearly 2.5 billion Vietnamese dong. This wasn't just petty cash, it was a serious criminal enterprise, taking advantage of both small businesses and families in mourning. Now let's talk about the actual people behind this whole thing, because how they acted in court tells you everything you need to know about who was really in charge.
I mean, look at this contrast. It's night and day. All 6 of his accomplices, and that includes his own wife,
They all admitted they were guilty. They cooperated with the police. They even paid money back to the victims. But Dern, he stood all by himself, claiming he was innocent and showing zero remorse, from the very beginning to the bitter end.
In fact, the court actually called him out on this directly in the final verdict. The judges literally pointed out that out of all 7 people charged, Dern was the only one who refused to own up to what he did. That defiance, it was a huge reason why the court didn't hesitate to keep his original, very long sentence.
And here's a fascinating little side story that just shows how isolated he was. His wife, Nguyen Thi Dieng, was also involved. At first, she appealed right alongside him, but then somewhere along the line, she had a change of heart. She dropped her appeal and she started working to pay the victims back. She chose a completely different road than her husband.
So what was it actually like inside that courtroom for the final hearing? Well, there were a couple of pretty memorable moments that really stood out.
So first, there was this little legal drama right at the start. Dering's lawyer stood up and said, "Hey, wait a minute. Not one of the 25 victims is here today. We need to postpone this." And that's a fair point, right? How can you have a trial about extortion without the people who were extorted? Well, the prosecutor was ready for that. They argued that they already had official, on-the-record statements from all the victims from the initial investigation. Since none of the victims had tried to change their story or add anything new, having them physically there just wasn't legally necessary. The court thought that made sense, and bam, the trial went on.
And here's a little tidbit that just shows you how notorious this case was. The hearing pulled in some unusual guests. A bunch of well-known internet gangsters, these online personalities famous for their tough guy image, they all showed up just to watch. That tells you just how big a name Doong Nguyen was in certain circles.
So, with the appeals thrown out and the sentences set in stone, the long, dramatic legal story of Doong Nguyen's cremation racket is finally, officially done. Let's do a quick recap of how it all ended.
So the road to this point was pretty clear-cut. The first trial ends, Dern gets 15 years. He and his buddy Ninh appeal, saying they did nothing wrong. Then, in the final act, the High Court takes a look, decides the first trial got it right, and slams the door on their appeals. Game over.
And this chart really just lays it all out visually. The longest sentences, by far, went to the 2 guys at the top, who insisted they were innocent and took their chances with an appeal. The other 5, who cooperated, they got lighter sentences and chose to just accept them.
So what about all that cash? That almost 2.5 billion VND they squeezed out of people? Well, according to the investigation, Dong spent every last bit of it on himself. The money's gone, and there was nothing left to give back to the victims.
And that brings us to the end. The courts have had their final say. A major criminal operation is history, and a very clear message has been sent about the difference between cooperation and defiance. But it does leave you with one final question to think about. With the book closed on Doong Nguyen, does a strong verdict like this actually stop the next big organized crime scheme from popping up?
All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're looking at a story that is just wild. It's straight out of a movie. We're talking about a celebrated public hero, a guy everyone looked up to as a protector, who takes a nosedive from grace in the most unbelievable way. This is the story of a knight who became the very monster he claimed to be fighting. And boom, right here, this slide just lays out the whole shocking picture. On one side, you have the public image of this guy, Nguyen Thanh Hai, a street knight, a protector, a guy who got actual awards for his bravery. And then, look at the other side, the grim reality. The hero is now facing charges for human trafficking, extortion, and fraud. I mean, how in the world does this happen? How does a symbol of justice completely flip and become a symbol of corruption?
To really get how this happened, we've got to rewind a bit. We have to understand the whole phenomenon he was a part of. So let's ask the basic question. Who exactly were these citizen crime fighters, these so-called street knights? So, the term Hip Si Dung Pho, which translates to street knight, is basically for regular people, ordinary citizens who voluntarily put their own safety on the line to chase down bad guys, thieves, robbers, you name it. You know, they popped up because there was a real need to fight street crime, and they became these sort of extended arms for the police, helping to keep things in order.
And our guy, Nguyen Thanh Hai, he was the absolute poster child for this whole movement. He wasn't just some random vigilante. No, he was officially recognized, celebrated, and literally showered with awards by the government for his incredible courage. For all intents and purposes, this man was a national hero.
But this brings up a huge question, right? What happens when you have that kind of power, that kind of public praise, but it's all operating without any rules, without any real oversight?
Well, this is where we start to see the dark side of all that fame. And this slide, this gets right to the heart of the problem. These street knights were working in a total legal vacuum. I mean, think about it. It was all volunteer-based, totally spontaneous. There was no specific law for what they could or couldn't do. No formal training. And this is the big one. They weren't public officials. That means they had zero legal authority to investigate anything or to use force. It was a legal gray area, a big one.
And in that gray area, something dangerous started to grow. You could call it a power fantasy. All that praise from the public going viral on social media, it started to get to some of these guys' heads. They began to see themselves not as helpers, but as their own independent police force, and they started acting way, way outside the law. This quote here really just nails it. When material elements and fame are introduced, the line between righteousness and self-interest becomes incredibly fragile. The moment fame and the chance to make money entered the picture, that original noble goal, it started to get real blurry real fast. So that brings us right back to Nguyen Thanh Hai himself. Let's trace his long descent into crime and try to pinpoint that one critical moment where everything changed.
Okay, so this timeline just lays it all out perfectly. In the past, he was a hero, celebrated by everyone. Then came the pivotal moment, the turning point. The authorities wanted all the street nightclubs to register, to work under the local police. And what did Hai do? He refused. He said no. And from there, the fall was fast. By 2023, he's running these shady rescue operations in Cambodia. And that leads directly to today, where he's been arrested for being the boss of a massive criminal ring.
And let's be super clear about this. Refusing to work with the police, that was a choice, a deliberate one. He wasn't just bending the rules anymore. He was actively stepping outside the entire legal system, completely away from any kind of government supervision. This was the moment he officially went rogue. So, if he was operating completely outside the law, what was he really doing? Well, this is where the story takes its darkest turn. It's time to pull back the curtain and unmask the criminal enterprise that was hiding behind this fake shield of chivalry.
Okay, get ready for this, because the scam was just horrifyingly cynical. First, his network would lure people from Vietnam over to Cambodia with these fake promises of great jobs. Then, they would literally sell them to scam companies, basically trafficking them into forced labor. Step 3, Hai's group swoops in and contacts the terrified families back home, offering to rescue their loved ones. And finally, the extortion. They jack up the rescue costs and force these desperate families to pay massive amounts of money to get their family members back. They made victims out of them twice.
And to pull this off, those rescue videos you might have seen floating around online, they were completely fake, just elaborate, staged performances. They were designed to play with the emotions of panicked families, to make them believe that Hamai was their only hope, and to pressure them into paying whatever he asked.
And the scale of this whole thing was just mind-boggling. In total, Hai's criminal group extorted almost 17 billion Vietnamese dong from these families, a staggering amount of money.
And out of that enormous sum, what was the hero's personal cut? Nguyen Thanh Hai personally pocketed more than 2.2 billion dong, all of it built on the pain and suffering of these families. The motive here wasn't justice, it was just pure, simple greed.
And at the end of the day, the real rescue didn't come from some rogue knight. It came from official police work. Thanks to cooperation between the Vietnamese and Cambodian police, 34 victims were brought home safely. It just goes to show who has the real power and the right to act.
You know, the damage from this case goes way beyond just one man's crimes. It makes you ask some really tough questions about who you can trust, and it forces us all to think about how we rebuild faith in the system.
Because really, the biggest damage here wasn't the money. It was the complete erosion of social trust. When a guy everyone thought was a hero turns out to be a master criminal, it makes people suspicious of every grassroots movement, even the ones that are genuinely trying to do good. It eats away at the very idea of community security. So what's the solution here? Well, a legal expert laid out some pretty clear recommendations. First, you've got to create a clear legal framework for these kinds of clubs. Second, give them mandatory training on the law. Third, you have to strictly prosecute anyone who crosses the line, no matter what their intentions might seem to be. And finally, a clear message to the public. Always, always use official channels. Don't turn to shady, private rescue services. Which really brings us to the core lesson of this entire tragic story. It's summed up perfectly in this quote. Chivalry is only truly valuable when it is placed within the framework of the law. It's so simple, right? Good intentions just aren't enough. Without accountability, without the rule of law, even the best ideas can be twisted into something terrible. And that leaves us with a really big question to chew on. How can we, as a society, encourage people to get involved and help keep their communities safe, while also building the right guardrails to make sure that good intentions can never, ever be twisted into a tool for evil like this again?
By 2023, High's operation had evolved from catching snatch thieves to something far more sinister: international human trafficking and extortion. High and his associates targeted the most desperate people, families whose children had been tricked into working in scam compounds in Cambodia. Presenting himself as a savior with deep connections, High offered to rescue these victims. It was a theater of cruelty. High's group would inflate rescue costs, force families to transfer massive sums of money through intermediate accounts, and organize illegal border crossings. In many cases, they colluded with the very criminals in Cambodia to create a supply chain of buying and selling people. Behind the heroic rescue videos posted on social media were staged scripts designed to prey on the terror of victims' families. The investigation revealed the group extorted nearly 17 billion VND, approximately 670,000 US dollars, with High personally pocketing over 2.2 billion VND. The White Knight had become a predator, using a shield of righteousness to hide his crimes. But the Ho Chi Minh City police were watching. In a massive coordinated crackdown, the police shattered the illusion. They didn't just arrest High, they dismantled his entire network. Nha Tang Hai, along with TikToker Huyen Cao Kuan and 40 other accomplices, were taken into custody. The charges were laundry list of felonies: human trafficking, organizing illegal immigration, extortion, and fraud. The arrest of Nha Tang Hai sent shockwaves through Vietnam. It wasn't just a criminal case, it was a blow to societal trust. The man who once chased robbers was now sitting in the same handcuffs he used to carry. This case serves as a grim warning about the dangers of unchecked vigilantism. When ordinary citizens are given power without legal boundaries, and when justice becomes a tool for personal branding and profit, the hero quickly becomes the monster they once fought against.
Thank you for spending your time with us on Vietnam True Crime. If you're interested in this series, please like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest episodes.